Templeton Curtis. Let's go ahead and bring that meeting to order, please. We just had a closed session item and there is no actionable, nothing to report out of the closed session. All right, so let's go ahead to a regular meeting, call to order, please. A roll call.
Director Spartanish,
Here.
Gardini,
Here.
Logan,
Here.
Pearson,
Here.
and Peterson.
Here. Pledge allegiance, Dr. Jardine.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order of business, any board member would like to switch the order of business? Everyone's good with that? Okay, then next is public comment. Members of public may address the board on any items of interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, but not on the agenda today. In compliance with Brown Act, the board cannot discuss or act on the items not on the agenda. Any public comment? No, great, okay. Consent agenda. We only have one item on the consent agenda, which is the minutes from the January 16th, 24. If any questions or comments about the minutes,
I was not, so I have to recuse myself from it.
we could just, I guess, we could motion and then you, since it's only item. Okay, all right. But if none other, then I'll entertain a motion for adopt the minutes.
I'll make a motion that the board adopt the minutes of the regular meeting, January 6, 2024.
I second.
Second, okay, roll call please.
Directors Logan,
Aye.
Pearson,
Aye.
Jardini,
Abstain.
Peterson,
Yes.
and Spartanish.
Aye. It passes, I will, thank you. All right, the next item is the business item is Measure A Oversight Committee Annual Report, which is for the report for the fiscal year 22-23. Unfortunately, our the chair of the board, Don Mosmanich, was not able to attend tonight due to family reasons, so I'll have our general manager, Jeff Brels, go over the over it and then we'll decide.
Thank you. Yes, the board will recall that the ordinance that was approved by voters as a part of the vote on Measure A in August of 2019 stated that if the ordinance is approved, an oversight committee, an independent oversight committee would be formed. So in early 2020, this board formed that oversight committee and appointed 3 people at the time to the committee. 2 of those 3 people have continued their service through today. And then earlier in the fall, last fall, 2 additional persons were appointed to the Measure A Oversight Committee. So through tonight's presentation, there are 4 persons on the committee. As in the prior couple of years, that committee met a couple of times in the fall. They reviewed preliminary budget actual reports at the year-end close. It was in September. They originally met, might have been October. And amongst reviewing just the committee's overall duties, which is to review expenditures to ensure that the funds from Measure A were spent appropriately as called out in the ordinance that was approved by the community or by the voters. The committee met again in December after the financial statements were finalized. They weren't yet approved by the board, but they were in final form. So the committee reviewed those, and at that time, after reviewing those financial statements and the expenditures associated with the fire fund and the revenues associated with Measure A, authorized the chairperson of the committee, who is Dan Mosmanich. He's been the chair since the committee was formed, to prepare the annual report. That was put together in a draft form here a little over a week ago. And we circulated that with the committee members and asked that if any of them had any material suggestions, the committee would this item would be postponed. The committee would come back together. They would tweak the report, and then it would come before you. There were no requests of that, and so the report was finalized. And Dan Mosmanich did intend on attending tonight's meeting. He's attended this in the years past when this item came before you. But couldn't make it kind of last minute. We did reach out to the vice chair of the committee, and they too were unable to make it out of town on some training. So the report is really quite self-explanatory. The funds are to be used for salaries, benefits, training, other personnel and related costs, costs for equipment and apparatus, acquisition, lease, operations and maintenance, costs associated with fire facility operations, maintenance, repair, renovation and equipment. And then they reviewed again to ensure that that was the case. They also outlined, the goals of what the department are to provide essential local fire protection and medical services 24/7, reduce fire 911 emergency response times, and to train and retain qualified firefighters. And through a review of the 2022-23 audited budget, the audited financial statements, the Measure A Oversight Committee finds that Measure A funds are being used as described in bylaw section 4.1. So these also include the names of the committee members and some further comments about cooperation from staff and the fire department, Fire Chief Peterson. So that is his report. He again, I did have communication with him today. He did not ask this item be postponed or anything, just he said he was unable to attend. So his attendance is not required. The bylaws simply say that the Measure A committee shall submit a report to the board annually with its findings, and that report has been submitted. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. If there are not, it's our recommendation that the report be accepted.
Any questions from the board members?
I do.
Go ahead.
I'm just a little confused under associated findings. When the statement is the 3-year SAFER grant provides a resource for 3-person teams to be on duty 24/7. Measure A has nothing to do with the SAFER grants.
That's correct.
Okay, so then,
It's just
Maybe just add
a
it.
comment that he's just sort of involved. You know, Dan was also on our fire committee last year, and maybe some of these issues kind of blur. But he's aware of the SAFER grant and the third
it
person.
just seems like it should be in there, but thank him for his service and we'll leave it alone. But it just confused me for a moment. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Public comment or questions regarding this report? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Any comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the report.
I'll make a motion that we accept Dan Moskovich's report on the Measure A funds.
A second.
I'll second the motion.
Great. Roll call, please.
Directors Jardini,
Aye.
Logan,
Aye.
Pearson,
Aye.
Peterson,
Yes.
and Fardonish.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, please thank him. The next item is the review of the fire financial model. So the model was updated for fiscal year 22-23 as well as 23 and 24. This is an informational item only. For Director Brooks, please.
Yeah, so just a way of reminder, very much related to the Measure A annual report, I suppose. Back in 2018, as the district was considering putting forward a ballot measure, several things were done prior to that formal decision. One of which was we hired a surveyor and we surveyed voters, and then we hired a consultant, really a couple of consultants to help us with some messaging. And one of those was an economist to help the district determine the minimum amount of the financial need to provide 24/7 covered operations in the fire department. And that work resulted in this 10-year financial model. I pulled up, this is what was presented to you in the spring of 2019, so almost 5 years ago now. And this model made various assumptions that we worked with the economist on, and this was, again, the model followed the way the line items in our budget at the time. Again, this is about 5 years old now, and it forecasted, what those revenues would be each year going out using an escalator. That can be seen, these assumptions in this escalator provision here. So some key items were like property tax amounts, et cetera. And then it looked at line items associated with salaries and overtime and paid on call or firefighters, et cetera. And it then forecasted in this case what the fund replacement or asset replacement amounts would be, et cetera, and determined that if, and again, Measure A, this parcel tax, which became Measure A, is this dollars and cents here. And the model then said, well, you know, if Measure A is implemented or the parcel tax is approved, in this year one of the operation, we would have about $38,000 in revenue over expenditures, and that would decline. It was, you know, a pretty flat. And then in the out years, again, this was a 10-year model. So beginning in the year 26, 27, so, you know, that's 3 years, 2.5 years from now, this small surplus would flip and become a small but growing deficit. And by year 10, the deficit would be somewhere in the tune of $72,000. Again, this is information that was developed about 5 years ago. So we knew at the time that this was that based on this model that Measure A wasn't a forever solution. That it would be really important to keep a close eye on our revenue expenditures, and that we would really need to be saving some of the surplus money in these early years and setting it aside so that we could fund some of these deficit years that the model had predicted. So that's the 2019 information. And then what we've been doing, we've been updating this model. Maybe this is the wrong term. We've been for comparison purposes adding information as time's gone along, so that you could compare what the model thought or predicted what would occur with what has occurred. And so the information in white, the white Excel cells, are identical to the model I just showed you. They haven't changed since 2019. The information in these yellow cells, we've populated. So beginning with the fiscal year 2021, we've listed actual expenditures after the audit was complete, 21, 22. And then for this for the first time that you're seeing, the board is seeing this, we've updated the actuals for 22, 23. So this information here comes off the approved financial statements. Let me try to blow this up just so you can see this just a little bit better. Is that big enough for you? Yeah, I like things big too. Anyways, you can see then how for example, on the revenue side, what's occurred. I'm gonna go over one more line so I can kind of cover two things at once. So in addition to the actuals for last fiscal year, the year that closed on June 30th, we've populated the budget amounts for the current fiscal year, the fiscal year 23-24. And this budget column includes the original budget plus any already approved budget amendments. And there were several that affected the fire fund. But you know, interest is an example. Last year, the model anticipated about $5,000 a year. Last year we got about $12,000. Our budget for this year is about $10,000. It is $10,000. I shouldn't say about. It's $10,000. Grant revenue. This has been there was none forecasted. Last year we received $92,000. The bulk of that was the SAFER grant. Of course, there's some expenses associated with that grant. In the current year's budget, it's $276. That's SAFER plus, I believe, some radio funds, the AFG grant that we received last year, but the money didn't come until this fiscal year. Miscellaneous income was quite a bit more both last year and this year, and that's almost all of that is due to, in both years we participated in kind of a long duration out of county assignment, both years, which produced quite a bit of a revenue in excess of what would have come otherwise. San Luis Ambulance, you know, that's pretty close to on what the model had predicted in these couple of years. Property tax, I think this is an important one to note. I've listed in here just because we've changed with the new auditors, we're going to be changing how we report on property taxes. I've shown here, just for the sake of consistency, the net property tax figure. So you may recall, we we get the district gets a property tax allocation. We get a little less than we're allocated because the county takes a haircut for collecting and submitting those funds. And so I've shown the net figure for both last year and the current year. And you can see we're about 50 grand a year above, actually more than that last year. And right now sitting about $50,000 more this year than the model had predicted. And this number, each time the county provides us an update on what we should anticipate, we're able to adjust upwards typically.
Is that only fire department's share? Or is
Yes, that's just the fire fund's share,
that- Okay.
not total property tax received. Weed abatement, this revenue is really tied to our expenses associated with weed abatement. It's not much to be read from this column. A high weed abatement figure, it wouldn't necessarily be a good thing on the revenue side. CFD revenues, this is one that's a little bit tricky because again, the model includes it in the fire fund, but we've formally yet to fold any CFD funds into the fire fund. In order to make these comparisons valuable, what I've done is simply taken the total CFD revenue received and use the same assumptions that were used when the model was created, that the fire fund is assumed to earn 72.5% of the CFD revenue. Of course, there's been no decision made on that yet. So this $24,000 that you see here isn't the total amount of net CFD revenue, but 72.5% of the CFD revenue, again, for just consistency purposes. So we're still a little behind what the model had predicted, but improving relative to the model. And then, of course, parcel tax, we're sitting a little ahead of the model, just very so slightly. And the reason we're just barely above the assumption is we've just had really, there's just been some new parcels created within the district. Every time there's a parcel split or a subdivision, more parcels pay the CFD tax. And then on the expense side, this is where things become a little bit more difficult or maybe less valuable. And over time, I really quite frankly feel like the model is, while it's interesting and it's worthwhile, its value diminishes over time because we make intentional operational changes. And for example, if you look at the comparison between last year's projection, last year's actuals for salaries, we're off by like $56,000. Well, we made a decision to add full-time staffing because SAFER funded it, and that the model never anticipated that. So that is why these numbers are so different than what was originally anticipated. Over time, for the past couple of years, we've been quite a bit higher than what the model predicted, in large part because of the out-of-county fire assignments, which have a lot of overtime associated. The paid on call or the reserve firefighters, if you look at these past several years, we've been very close to what the model had predicted. From last year, it goes down a little bit. And the reason is we have less hours, less total hours in a given week that we're covering with a reserve firefighter than we did prior to implementing the SAFER positions. So we're gonna see a savings that this year, we think that savings is about $43,000 when you compare the model to our current projection for reserve firefighters. This number will go back up if the SAFER grant is not renewed or those positions are not kept, and we go back to the same staffing model that we had prior to the SAFER positions a couple years from now. And then some of these figures are just tied to payroll. We anticipate these being higher because we have more full-time employees for FICA. Unemployment insurance it's a small number and we're within it anyways. Workers' compensation, we're quite a bit lower than the model and we have been all along. It was really a matter of changing sort of how we file with SDRMA. And so our costs are a little lower than what the model predicted, and that has nothing to do with SAFER. PERS retirement costs, kind of two factors here. We're almost exactly where the model was last year, and a little lower by 15% or something for the current year. But that's a kind of you have two factors that kind of equal each other out. One is we paid down the UAL a couple years ago. That was not something that the model had predicted, and so that lowered our total PERS cost, but then we added more full-time employees, so that raised the PERS cost, so. Kind of offsetting. Health insurance is quite a bit below the model and actually would be lower yet if we didn't have these additional full-time employees. We've transferred, when the model was first created, the fire fund directly paid the retirees, those who retired out of the fire funds, medical insurance costs upon retirement. That burden is shifted to the administration fund. You know, we set aside money in the OPEB fund and we're now covering all those costs out of admin. So we're well under about half almost. Last year, this year it's more, but mostly because again, those additional full-time employees. HRA accounts are, you know, they're higher, because again, of more full-time employees. That's a $2,000 a year benefit, per employee. Covered by, I mean, it's part of the safer, costs. There's a line item in here that was not this professional services line item that was not in the models. We've just continued to try to capture it, although the funds spent in these couple of years are not meaningful at all. CAL FIRE costs are very close to what the model had predicted, but a little higher. Weed abatement costs, again, these are going to be highly fluctuate. And one high year doesn't necessarily predict a future high year. Legal services have been, you know, below what the model had predicted. Purchase services, you know, more than what the model had predicted. So forth. So some of these are really small items, probably not worth spending time on. Supplies is one that's been higher this year. This $102,000. We've had some budget amendments, some costs for things like radios, some things you'd call one-time expenses, not necessarily indicative of future expenses, but well above what the.
Wasn't that in the grant? That we-
It was,
Yes.
yeah.
So can I ask a question on that, if it's a expense and then the $113,000, what was it for?
So we included the grant money that's associated with it up here in the revenue side.
Okay, so when you send the people out for overtime, it was 113,000 for overtime, but we got money in for getting reimbursed for sending them out. So where is that money?
It's right here under the miscellaneous income.
As 148?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to know where that was. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So that was supplies. Again, some of these, you know, this line item here, vehicle O&M, we've been spending quite a bit more than what the model had predicted each consistently. So that's probably reflective of a line item that's going to remain higher. Telephone costs, we've added personnel, full-time personnel. A lot of our telephone costs are really cell phone plans and actually data plans on iPads for reporting purposes. That just didn't exist back in 2019. Electricity costs are above the model. You know, even though the model had included escalator clauses, you know, rates have continued to go up pretty dramatically. Water, sewer, gas, you know, or utility costs are a little high. Some of these costs I know we're gonna be recommending some adjustments to you in a couple of weeks. They're not very meaningful in the big picture, but like this is an area where we probably have too much money in the budget. We didn't hit that high gas. Probably realized this too. Remember last year, gas prices went through the roof, and that just hasn't happened this winter, thankfully. Travel, I'm just looking for some more meaningful ones. Admin allocation, this was one that was has been a subject of concern. You know, we were close up until this change in administrative cost allocation last year, just a little higher than what the model predicted. And of course, this year, you know, significantly higher due to the revised admin allocation plan. And so sort of the bottom line though, when you look at this and you want to compare, I think what's valuable is rather than focus on any individual line item, is just big picture wise, how are we doing bottom line compared to what the model predicted? And now we're into this, you know, 4 completed years and 1 that's 2/3 of the way done. And if you look at the comparison, like this was back the year 1 of our 24/7 operation. And of course, We didn't start on July first, we started, I think, October 30th or sometime in October.
Correct.
Yeah, you know, we saved, you know, $90,000 more than the model thought we would. And we did stuff with that money. We either spent it on one-time expenses or shoved it into that savings account for future years, or we shoved it into additional asset replacement contribution. Year two, we saved about $95,000 more than the model thought we would. Year three, we saved about $120,000 more than the model thought we would. That's the year that just ended. And then this year, we're on pace to save about $60,000 more. So, I think from that point of view, when you look out here, you know, we're well ahead of this pace. You know, I don't think that while I haven't modeled all these figures out, and there's a lot of things that are gonna change, you know, our bottom line is working out to be, you know, noticeably better than what the model had predicted each year. And while the thing still flips, and I understand why, you know, this will be a more subdued, my belief, it'll be more subdued than is what is shown. And we've got money in the bank that'll make this last a lot longer before we utilize or spend all of that future fire operations set aside that the district has already accounted for. So you know, from this point of view, I think there's value in it, but you know, over time, you know, it's just gonna be a diminishing. It's important, but I don't think that we've made enough changes and probably will continue to. That the model just will have a reduced value over time in terms of its prediction of revenue and expenses. So, but this item, the board had requested this come before you once the information was available, and now it is. And so that's why it's on your agenda tonight. The fire committee has also requested this come before the committee, and I would plan on bringing it before the committee, even though it's made up of primarily some of you. Since the committee had requested a review once this was also updated. So happy to try to answer any questions or. Any questions?
So I have more comments than anything else. First of all, thank you for completing this, because I think it provides some insight into how we're tracking against this model, considering that when the board had this model presented to them, many of the assumptions were very conservative so that we didn't overstate the projections. But also looking at a 10-year model is kind of hard to look at 10 years out into the future. So it's good now to see how some of our assumptions have changed, and a couple that in particular that we didn't anticipate that you pointed out was the SAFER grant, and that has put us more favorable. But then at the same time, looking at how we do the cost allocation for administrative cost, that has had a significant impact on the fire department's budget, almost doubling it or more than doubling it, the admin cost. So while we're tracking and trending very favorably against the model, and I think it will hopefully balance out at the end of the 10 years. I think we still need to be a little cautious, because if that trend continues, you know, the net difference is not going to be as great. The other benefit that we've had is the out-of-county services. That has brought in additional revenue, even though on the back end, it's caused more overtime. The net effect has been favorable revenue, additional revenue. So I think we still need to be cautious because we do have large expenses within the fire department to be able to provide the tools and equipment necessary to be an effective department. So thank you again for bringing this forward.
Any other questions or comments? I'll open it to the public. Any questions or comments from the public? No, nobody's online either. All right. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Any further comments? Otherwise, I guess as this is information. Yeah, so we can move on. Anybody else? No? Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for bringing this to us. Appreciate it. We'll move to the next item. Wow, 3 items for fire department tonight. That's pretty good. Next item is the ad hoc committee fire fund, the recommendation that, we have. I guess I'll do this one then.
Sure.
You could take a break. All right. So back on December 19th, I go ahead and I formed an ad hoc committee with Director Pearson to review the administrative allocation cost for the fire fund. As you can see, now I guess for this upcoming fiscal year is going to be around $270,000. So we wanted to try to come up with some ideas to go ahead and try to offset that. So that was our purpose of our committee. So we met twice. We met once on December 28th of 23 and once on January 12th of 24. But the first meeting, I think it was about 3 hours or so. The second meeting was about, 2 hours. At both meetings, General Manager Jeff Burrows was involved and Natalie was involved at our second meeting. We ended up reviewing a lot of documents. As you could see, we listed the documents we reviewed, historic property tax allocation, historic administrative cost allocation, the 23 administrative allocation plan, the fiscal year 22-23 and fiscal year 23-24, the administrative allocation costs by fund, and the forecast for the 24-25. We looked at the fire fund 10-year financial model. We looked at the SAFER grant eligible costs just to see how that helped the fund in certain areas. We also looked at both the Parks and Rec budget as well as the fire fund budget for the 23-24. There was an analysis done in 2021 for Parks and Rec and Solid Waste Fund. We looked at that. That basically showed that how much of the cost was going to the programs versus the facility. So we got a little bit of idea on that. We also looked at the Community Facilities District revenue forecast, the CFD forecast. And also we looked at historic uses of cell site lease revenue. What those were used for. I think we talk a little bit about that a little bit later at the meeting in the report. But our goal, we looked at everything and we started discussing alternatives, options. We went over a lot of different options, alternatives, trying to understand as well the budget, where all the revenue line items were coming from. And we looked at, basically all the line items from other departments as well, just to see where there is room, find a little wiggle room. So by looking at everything, one of the items that became of interest was the cell site revenue. And that's about $85,000. Our concern with the cell site revenue at first was that, well, we're not going to be able to use it because it is in the water fund as well, and we thought that could only be used for water fund because of the location of the cell sites. But General Manager, he did some research, and then if you don't.
Yeah, so the committee asked asked staff to determine what the limitations of that were. And I guess I was pretty cautious going into it, not thinking we would have the flexibility that it turns out we do. We were able to find like a 25-year history of cell site revenue uses. In the early 2000s or really through 2009, the cell site revenue was used to offset expenses primarily in Parks and Recreation on a program by program basis. In other words, let's say for example, in 2008, $3,500 would be placed into the basketball program line item, and X amount would be placed in the concerts in the park line item, for example. Now my assumption going into this was that the funds were moved. I knew they were used back then. I knew they were used in Parks and Recreation years ago. But my assumption was they were moved to water because they're, quite frankly, one of them sits on a water tank. It's not even on the water, it's physically on a water tank. But we were able to find some legal advice dating back to 2009 that said that our legal counsel believed they could be used for any bona fide purpose of the district. They weren't limited to Parks and Recreation. And we took that to mean that well, they must not be limited to the water fund. It looks like in 2009 and 10, the policy decision that was made, and not a legal decision, but the policy decision that was made was the water fund was running in a deficit. And so therefore, to solve some financial challenges with the water fund, the sales site revenue was moved to the water fund. We confirmed with the current legal counsel that the interpretation of 2009 stands, and that the board is essentially free to use the sell site revenue in any for any bona fide district purpose. And the reason that they believe that that's the case, and in discussing this, was because they're not part and parcel to the actual water utility. They're just essentially excess to the water utility. We've got more property than we need or are using up there, and that's why we've allowed these cell leases to occur, and they generate revenue. And so the board is free to shift the beneficiary or shift the revenue to another fund if if that's desirable, with really no legal constraint.
Great, thank you. So as a result, we decided to recommend to move the sell side revenue to the fire fund, and we recommend to start it starting this year, 23-24. We had Natalie check with our auditors, and they said that as long as we don't go backwards previous years, we should be fine. So we'll be able to amend the budget so that way we could add approximately $80,000 or so to the fire fund starting this year. And then we will continue to do that going forward.
So I have a question, because those cell sites sit on top of the water tank, do they not?
One does.
One does.
One is actually physically on a water tank. The others are on the property surrounding the tank.
So my question is there any maintenance for that, to maintain the water tank itself because of that cell?
Well, I wouldn't say there's any specific maintenance. The water tanks are maintained, but there's not additional maintenance required because of the cell sites. When the cellular equipment that's on top of the large water tank on that site is an AT&T lease. And when AT&T wanted to expand their use on that property, say 8 years ago or so, we had them analyze probably getting more details here than you want to know, but we had them analyze the structure of the tank. And based on that analysis, we determined that the tank has already seen some minor impacts from having that use on the tank, some deformations, and it cannot take any additional loading, either wind loading or weight loading on the tank. And so for the past 8 years, we've been trying to get AT&T to amend the lease to move the equipment off site, and they're interested in doing so. Matter of fact, this item came before the board earlier this year, and I expect it'll come back again.
So we don't have any history of any maintenance expenses related to the cell site equipment?
No, not in my time anyway.
Okay.
We do maintenance on the tanks, but it's not specific to the area. And the lease requires, when AT&T removes that equipment, it requires them to restore the tank to its, pre-existing condition. I mean, that's not gonna be like it was never there, where there were punctures, holes, and mounted and stuff. But that was a decision made a long time ago, and we're sort of stuck with that impact at this point.
I just want to make sure that the expense for the maintenance follows where the revenue.
So there are some expenses with the cell site leases, but they're more in the line of like negotiating costs and legal costs and for the past 13, 14 years, those costs have gone to the water fund because the water fund was the recipient of these benefits. I would argue that if this revenue source is moved to the fire fund, then the fire fund would have to pay any legal costs that might come with it. So they're the recipient of those revenues.
Okay, thank you.
So this revenue will, I'm sorry.
I think you just answered my question, except I'm probably jumping ahead, but at the very bottom of your first recommendation, you're saying that the cost will be taken from the water fund, which will eventually impact the water rates.
Mhm.
And I think I just heard that Jeff saying that he would recommend, and I would also recommend that the expenses follow the revenue. So whatever expenses are, that they come out of the revenue that goes to the fire department, and why should the water fund have to pay for those expenses?
For maintenance and.
For
yeah.
maintenance, I think we're
Yeah.
saying is that will
Yeah.
follow.
Yes.
I just wanna just one point.
Yeah.
So even aside from those expenses, it will still have an impact, it will eventually have an impact on rates, because right now, the water fund gets that, let's say it's a net 80 grand, just ballparking it, that's coming, that's serving as a benefit to all of the ratepayers, because that revenue's accounted for before the rates are calculated, so, there won't be an immediate impact, though the fund is healthy, there's a surplus last year, this year, next year, hopefully. But when rates are recalculated and there's no longer this if this action takes place, there's no longer this sell side revenue to going into the water fund, it will factor into those rates, and it's probably, not recalculating everything, probably in the neighborhood of $3 an account per month. Somewhere along the lines.
Understood.
And then, so this revenue will slightly increase over, as I guess because of the leases and they have increased rates. But also if we manage to secure a lease with Dish Network, then that will increase this revenue as well. So hopefully we could talk with Dish Network and see what.
Yeah, we're in regular communication with Dish Network as recently as last week, but have been for 5 years, so.
Yeah.
Keep
our fingers
I
crossed.
think it's important to note that this particular revenue source is fluid, so that was a positive discovery that the fire fund requires it in the immediate future, but should other departments require it down the road, say the water impact becomes, a disputed item in the community or there's an issue there. These are fluid revenue sources that are not restricted by law or any type of policy. So that's definitely a bonus discovery in our discussions.
Yes, so we could, yes, as you said, we could move it to other funds if needed. Our other recommendation is to commit all CFD net proceeds to the fire fund for the next 5 years, so which would be through the fiscal year 29-30. And this is on top of the $80,000 for the fire truck that we have already discussed. By doing so, we estimate that over the next 5 years, we could add about $300,000 to the fire department.
And so that $300,000 is in addition to the 80,000. Okay.
Yes.
I want to just make one point. The reason there's $300,000 available likely is because the $80,000 commitment wouldn't kick in until the engine's already here and an asset replacement obligation occurs. It's ongoing amount above and beyond the $80,000 is gonna be limited in the short term. So it's really the early years before the $80,000 commitment begins that creates this
So
cash influx.
yeah, so we have about 75,000 currently in the fund, and then obviously this coming year. So that is in
Yeah.
itself is about 150,000. So yes, but yeah, this would be on top of the $80,000. So the fire truck asset replacement, that's still in place, so that will still be gonna be funding that. So the funds from so this is the item of, the important item is the funds from the items 1 and 2 are recommended to be placed into the fire fund future operations account, which as of today has as of June 30th, 24 projected balance of about $194,000. The additional funds then will be available to cover the forecasted deficit in the future years, as well as one-time expenses such as replacing out-of-date SCBA's should the grant funding not materialize. Funds from item 1 and 2 are not to be used to expand operations or to maintain the current safer grant funded engineer positions. And then the last item that we recommend is the recycling grant program, which is about $15,000 a year. That's currently is in the Parks Fund, Parks and Rec Fund, but the 15,000 gets to be used for some, recycling grants and things like that. We recommend that only be used if there is excess funding in the Parks and Rec and Solid Waste Fund after make sure there's no other needs for the parks, because last year we had quite a bit of problems with park maintenance and things like that, so we want to make sure that we have that flexibility. So we recommend to have that only be available once everything in the parks has been funded for.
So what are we looking at here?
The
Do we know?
$15,000.
15,000?
Yes. And we request that you guys, that we sit down and discuss this, and if there's any recommendations, if you want us to review some other items, we'll be more than happy to. Or otherwise, we could, give it back to the staff and let them do their magic. So any questions?
So I have another question on item 4. The $15,000, is that based on last fiscal year, or is that based on this fiscal year and what we're projecting?
It's every year we set aside $15,000.
Okay, so, okay. Oh, that's what we put into the budget?
It's part of the franchise fee.
Yeah.
That $15,000, we have it for a grant,
Okay,
but it's in the.
Okay. all right, thank you for that clarification.
Director Jordan.
At first I have a comment. I want to thank you and collude for Director Pearson for doing this. I've been on the board 8 years almost, and nobody has ever done this kind of in-depth research. Never by any committee, never by finance and admin, to sit down and really look at where everything is, kind of move it around and take a good look at everything. So I totally applaud your efforts and your leadership in this.
Thank you.
And I have questions. I don't agree with all of them, of course,
Okay.
but I just want to say this is the first time I've seen anything like this go on, and I really applaud that. So just kind of questions. So historic property tax allocation then was left alone and it remains where it is, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Historic administrative cost allocation, well, if I understand it, that's no longer relevant because we're with this $140,000 administration cost allocation. That's gonna stay consistent from here moving forward unless we take away the safer grant people, correct?
It actually does, it is fluid, it does change,
It's
so,
methodology.
yeah, so for next year, it was gonna be about $170,000.
Oh, it's even
Yeah,
more.
Yeah,
Okay, okay. We went over the fire fund 10-year financial model, and we were showing that to be in the positive, so that's that positive $100,000 and some. So I'm just trying to get my numbers right. Which was $194,000.
that's the fire fund, that's the amount that's in the fire fund. correct?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's the amount that's been shifted to that future operating account. It's kind of a paper savings account that we created, 3 years ago. And so it was a way of the board showing that when you see these surpluses, you're setting it aside for those future deficits.
Right, okay, okay.
But it's not controlled by any external source. It's still your money. It's still within the fire fund. It's just, set aside.
So I've been picking up hints, and I'm not positive on the SAFE grant eligible cost. When you were going over the 10-year forecasted model, you said something about cost.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, how does a grant cost us money? And then there's eligible cost here, so could somebody explain that to me?
So there are part of the Safer Grant, there are some parts that are not covered by the Safer Grant. So, and that's what we discussed at length during our meetings. So there's very strict rules on what we could get reimbursed for the fire fund. But at the same time, we looked at, well, do we have other savings because of Safer Grant? And for example, you could see that the part-time fire fund, the allocation for that, the part-time firefighters, that went down because we do have the Safer Grant personnel to take, to help us with that. So we looked at it and ended up being almost the, same, or maybe we're saving maybe about $20,000-$30,000 annually. With, if you look at all the expenses versus
So what was the number on the cost?
that, it's really hard to determine that. We try to pin that down. It just,
But can you outline what costs are not covered by the Safer?
Yeah, so the Safer Grant is really covering our direct personnel costs for the two engineer positions. So it will cover like their direct payroll costs, their direct benefits costs, like what it costs us to enroll them in health insurance, and the FICA costs, and the workers' compensation costs. And it will cover the scheduled overtime, because these full-time firefighters work a schedule that has some built-in overtime into it. But it does not cover extra hours if they're set to training, or extra hours for overtime for those individuals. Or the cost of somebody else's overtime when they call in sick.
So is it also, when we look at the administration costs, because they're part of the personnel, so there's probably a cost in that too?
Yeah, I mean, there's an indirect cost, right? Because the administrative allocation is based on prior year actual expenses, actual operating expenses by fund. And so yes, because we're spending more on personnel in the fire fund, it will drive up, and that'll begin to affect us next fiscal year, because we started this last February. Drive up the fire fund's expenses a little bit. And if those expenses go up faster than the other expenses within the district go up, then its cost allocation will be higher in terms of percentage. So there is an indirect impact to the cost allocation fund during the period of time that we have the Safer Grant. But that model is dynamic, and it will, just like it's picking up those additional costs, when those costs go away, those will fall and it'll reset. But there are some costs associated with having these folks here that is not reimbursable under Safer, and administrative allocation is one of them.
So this is a comment from Director Giardini, which is, I wasn't aware of the fact that we had costs associated with Safer Grants, and that it seemed to me when we were told about it, it was like this great thing. I wish I had known about costs associated, even if they're negligible. I feel like it wasn't good reporting, so that if in the future, if some kind of grant comes up and there's all these benefits, as a board member, and I think as a board, we should also be told about potential costs associated with it, just for future references.
I agree. I just do want to, when it comes to the administrative cost allocation, just keep in mind that changed just after the Safer Grant was accepted.
Yeah.
So that overhead component
we had no idea.
wasn't dynamic before. It was a fixed thing, and it wouldn't have been, if the Safer Grant had arrived 5 years ago, it wouldn't have affected your cost allocation, the cost allocation.
It's all basically the administrative allocation.
But agreeing, we certainly should strive to making sure you have all the information to make an informed decision.
Right. So before I move on to Park and Recs, one other thing, every 4th of July, we hold a fundraiser, and that fundraiser, when I ask people, they go, well, we go to have the pancake breakfast because it's tradition. And they think they're supporting the fire department. They have no idea kind of that it's a fundraiser for somebody else. And so I'm wondering, I don't know if we probably have in the past been told how much is raised and where that money goes, but my question is, if our fire department needs money, we're putting on this fundraiser that I think the community's perception is that that money stays here. And so my question is, I mean, I understand the goodwill and all the niceties, but, if our fire department needs money, maybe we should relook at how much of that we do as a fundraiser and how much we do that for our own fire department. And I noticed that the ad hoc committee didn't look at that. So that would be something I would be interested in looking at in the future, you know, because you said bring other ideas forwards. That would be one of them.
And we could, just, I just wanna just clarify, I know, and I agree with you that because back when we were doing Measure A, they said, well, I come and eat pancakes, until your $10 goes a long way, but, that is not a TCSD or a Templeton Fire event, it's a Templeton Firefighters Association event. And so that, but I agree that the average.
But I think the perception is what Pam is bringing down, is the perception is that it's a fundraiser that's taking place and we're supporting the Templeton Fire Department. So I don't know about the signage.
So it says Templeton Firefighters Association, the tickets say Templeton Firefighters Association, that money specifically goes to sponsor sports teams throughout the community.
Is that true? Parks and Rec?
We sponsor teams.
Here in our
The
community?
association.
You used to.
They're
I
not
haven't
doing
had
it
a
anymore?
team sponsored by you guys in several years.
So I'd have to ask the association what they're doing with the money now.
So does it stay
A
local?
lot, a good majority of it's, well, from my past recollection and what we've done in the past is we always sponsored sports teams with it. Whether it was, and we donated I know we donated a significant amount to help out the high school football team. A couple of other programs within the community. I would have to ask the association what they've spent this last year on, if anything. But the pancake breakfast brings in about, I think, $8,000. And after everything's paid for, they net somewhere about 4,000, 3,000, somewhere in that range.
Mhm.
So
Well,
it's a fairly insignificant amount that the association just keeps in their coffers.
Well, how come we don't, probably a mean question, but why do we do it for the association and why don't we just do it for Templeton Fire Department?
Cause the association puts it on. That's just past
Okay.
history.
Always our guys who are working it.
That's who the
Association.
association. It's an association of firefighters and retired and then former firefighters who are.
Yeah, I'd say 50% of the people working either ex-Templeton guys, Dave Tice, Steve Barkley, Kurt Pennington.
So just as a maybe knowledge base, could you find out where this money that we're giving them, is it being allocated locally to us or?
Yeah, like I say, from past history, when I was part of it, we always donated to sponsor teams.
Mhm.
So
There'd be some
if
kind
that's
of
changed,
arrangement, like with the Templeton Rec Foundation and the Rec Department, sometimes they put on events and the proceeds are divided or.
Well,
Allocated
let's see if we
here.
can get the association to just report on what they do with the money, say that's come up and what you do with the money, and then you can make you just see if it's something you wanna look at. I mean, this pancake breakfast goes back decades, you know, long before the Templeton Fire Department had financial challenges and when it was really a volunteer-based department. And so I think that's kind of just continued the way it is, but I certainly agree with you that you know, when you're out there in line, you know, around the corner here and like, oh yeah, we're here to support Templeton Fire and,
Right,
you know, who am I I don't say, well, you're not supporting them, so get out of line, you know, it's just, it's a goodwill thing, it's, for most people, it's just it's their routine. What do you do on the 4th of July? We get up early, go have pancakes, go watch the parade. Hope nobody gets hurt.
that initially started in 1991. Cause the 2 previous years prior, in 89 and 90, we did a hot dog booth in the park,
mhm.
prior to the pancake breakfast. And then in 91, we switched it out and started doing the pancakes.
Well, I mean, just my point, which everybody gets here, we all think we're supporting Templeton Fire. And so if there was a way to, even if we're not supporting Templeton Fire, to make sure some of that money's coming back to our local community, that would be probably nice for the community to know. So when I get asked about it, or future directors get asked about it, we can say, well, we do it for the good of the big thing, but this amount of money does sponsor these kind of things here locally. It's just sort of.
Yeah, I can ask them. They are a 501c3, so I can ask them what they're spending the money on.
Okay,
Thank you.
so, I would have to say, I agree with the historic use of the cell site and the new revenues going to the fire department. I have a little bit of a problem with how much money we're allocating to the fire department for the CFD funds for the next 5 years with all the other money they're getting, and it being kind of hardline committed to them and not to parks. And I see that Melissa's here, so not to put Melissa on the spot, but I would like to have input from Melissa. I mean, I do appreciate what Kaludin you did. It's an amazing job, but that's the one thing that
So-
kind of rubs me.
So our thought behind that was, we looked at the Parks and Rec budget and it had done well last year. It was, I believe $85,000 positive, the budget for Parks and Rec. And then this year, we're assuming it's gonna do well again. And the franchise fees are, all of it's going to Parks and Rec, and that's going to continue to grow. So it's probably gonna be somewhere around $250,000 this year. So by looking, I mean, we looked at the budget and we saw that because Park was doing well, at least at this time, that's what we chose to allocate all the money from CFD to fire department. And we also chose purposefully to say 5 years. The reason we said 5 years was because to show that it's not set in stone. So for future
Right.
board members could look at it and say, okay, it was allocated for 5 years. So in 5 years, we could take a look at it again. And if Parks and Rec needs the money for whatever reason and fire department doesn't, then that's gonna be their decision to see how to allocate it. So this doesn't really kind of tie their hands behind them because it's only for 5 years. And as Jeff mentioned, probably year 3, 4, and 5, it's not gonna be that much money. It's gonna be the beginning, like what's the money it's in there now, and then maybe the next 2 years. So that's why that was our thought behind it. I mean, at least that's what my thought was. I don't know, Director Pearson, how you feel about that?
No, I mean, I agree for the most part, and also the goal was to not kind of take away from other departments' current revenue structures, and the CFD fund was one of the sources that had not really been allocated. It's kind of just sitting there. It's not really doing any work for us, other than the most recent policy change for the first 80,000. And so this was just really a source that we could move around now to the benefit of fire, and then, you know, again, with that 5-year limitation, reevaluate and see if Park needs it or there's some other use for it.
Okay, well,
And another thing was, that's why also we added the last item, the $15,000, that would to compensate that a little bit as well. So if Parks does need it, there's another $15,000 that they could use.
well, I think, I mean, I'd like to hear from Melissa. For number 2, how it's written here, I would like to say recommending to commit. So it's not a commit, because what if something happens with Park and Recs and they suddenly need the money? You know, if it's a recommendation to commit it for the next 5 years, then it's a recommendation. It's not a commit, like a definitive thing. Because I do see, it seems like our agendas are always full of what the fire department needs. And we don't hear from Melissa, you don't squeak enough, my dear. But when I go to the Park and Rec, the building is worn down, the office don't look nice. We're always short-staffed in there. You're accommodating a ton of people, kids, and probably need more staff. I don't have any proof of this, it's just what my eyes see. And so, I kind of wish I knew more of what parks needed to before, I mean, everything that's gone on in this thing, I'm in favor of. I'm a little concerned about firmly committing all the CFD funds. And I kind of would like to hear more from parks consistently, because I don't hear from them. That might be a criticism, my dear.
Feedback.
But, we have failing equipment, we have a park plan, improvement plan that's like in the middle of nowhere, and I never know where it's going, and, there's just things I think that parks needs that I don't hear about. And, that would help us balance things, make sure you stay whole. If you're getting this $265,000, great, if that's gonna help you out with more people. Because you're not gonna be here forever, we need to get another person trained, that kind of stuff. I think you could use more staff as is, but anyway, enough of me. I would kind of like to hear from parks.
Awesome, well, thank you. So, the parks themselves, aside from the facilities, the parks need some attention, right? And welcome to the Parks and Rec Committee, by the way.
Yeah,
You'll hear from me quite a bit now. We'll get a
Okay.
whole lot of updates whenever we get that meeting scheduled, okay?
Okay.
We, like, the first order of business right now is getting the parks back into playable condition. They're trashed, right? They need a lot of attention. So that is a big part of it. And the facilities, the buildings themselves need some attention, right? And we have been basically treading water, just trying to keep everything afloat while the community's growing. We're offering all these extra services, right? I think when the CFD was formed, Parks and Rec paid for a portion of that, right? To create the CFD. And at some point, I would hope that returns to us, right? Parks and Rec has been in the position of losing cell site money, right? It used to help fund our programs. That's why we don't have Halloween carnivals and Easter egg hunts and all of that anymore. It would help fund those things, right? So we couldn't get sponsors for that, so and we don't duplicate services, right? So other community organizations started offering these services. So we backed out and hunkered down and focused on the programs that were able to generate revenue and, create community, right? Like just sort of to keep the kids busy, right? We've been in the position of getting admin fees just dumped on us and not knowing what to do with it, right? So I know where fire's at right now, right? I feel that keenly. We didn't have Measure A, but we did what it took to, hunker down and focus on it, right? And I think the board took some pretty big steps at the time, whoever was on that board, to sort of help. And when we merged the refuse, the solid waste, right? And brought those franchise fees over it, like for the first time in 20 years, there was like some breathing room, right? And then we started thinking, okay, we can spend this money. So we did some much needed maintenance on those trees at Evers, right? Buying a tractor, we're starting to spend that money on the things that are going to sort of facilitate all these needs and getting these needs met, right? So I think for right now, for the foreseeable future, as the franchise fees continue to come in, I think we are in an okay position for a short term to, alleviate what's happening with fire, right? We've got our sort of pressure release valve going, right? And we can, let's get one for fire, right? I think that makes perfect sense. I would be leery of it being a permanent arrangement. I like the 5-year arrangement, right? Because at some point, there will be different situations, different issues, and different solutions to new problems we haven't even dreamed up yet, right? So I like that it's temporary. I like that there's a sunset on it so that we can relook at it, right? And see what's needed next, right? Because Parks and Rec has needs, that's for sure. The other thing is with CFDs, I think a lot of it has to be related to growth, community growth, right? We can make arguments in Park and Rec that there's things that are needed, maintenance that is needed due to community growth, right? But a lot of what needs to happen has more to do with just regular maintenance that we've been defined, so.
Actually, that's a great point that you made, Melissa. That was one thing that we did discuss. It was easier to justify the growth because CFD money, as you mentioned, has to be for growth. It's easier to justify it for fire department at this time versus parks.
Well, it kind of takes me back a few years when we had this huge deficit in Park and Rec. And it was, how do we solve for that problem? And I feel like we've shifted now, that's our issue now, front and center with the fire department. And with the Park and Rec, we solved that by the solid waste. And the big hit to you at that time was suddenly, when we increased the water rates, Park and Rec now had to pay for water. It
Which
was
is
hit with a
equivalent.
$40,000.
I work for the water bill.
Yeah, so I mean, it was $40,000, it's like, where do we find that? And so that was a big issue, but we solved for that problem, and I think you're right, I think we have breathing room with Park and Rec. I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot that,
Currently.
if we had money, and you know, we could do a lot more than what we're doing, but I think we're managing. I think the big hurt is we've got a fire department that needs a new truck. And hopefully that will come to us from the federal government, but if not, we need to fund that. You know, I appreciate your honesty, and your input on this and understanding as well. And I appreciate your willingness to see that, yeah, there needs to be money shifted to the fire department.
I appreciate that attitude of,
Yeah. Being a team player.
camaraderie and a team player rather than saying what might be more important than other departments. And so I appreciate that camaraderie a lot. It should be rewarded for that.
Tom
I
appreciates
agree,
it.
I agree that, that we have plugged the hole for Park and Recs before. And, but I also see that we can't just let you skate because you've got buildings and things that need to be addressed too. I think the other thing under, comments for what this could do is, you know, we looked at, I think, the fire department expansion, and that we never looked at, maybe really looking at this building or what's over in the building that doesn't get used over there, and that might be something the ad hoc committee could take a look at too.
Facilities committee now.
No, am I?
Think so, don't you?
Yes.
Just assign myself a task. Okay, and I'm on Parks and Rec too.
That's you got all this.
Oh,
stuff to
good.
figure out.
All this stuff to figure out, yay, okay, other than that, my only concern is number 2, I would say recommend to commit. But there are 4 other board members here, and so, other than that, I don't know if this is an action item or what is this?
So I have a question go on number 2, when we say CFD funds, when we did the financial model, what was our assumption? Because I'm looking at that and it's got an amount, but was the assumption that we used, was that the CFD funds were going to the fire department?
The model used the same breakdown for fire and Parks and Rec as property taxes. 72.5% was of the CFD funds. for
Okay.
fire.
Okay,
But when you see the model, the line item for CFD in the fire financial model, that wasn't the total CFD funds the district would receive, but 72.5%.
Okay, thank you. Of what we anticipated to receive. Okay, thank you for that.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess I'll go to the public, no public comments, okay? Come back to the board, so if we could have direction. So my understanding is on item 2, instead of saying commit, say recommend to commit, so your goal is on that too, so that way.
A little bit more flexible.
Do you just want it reviewed every year, like budget time, or?
I
what
think,
is-
I think the board has the flexibility regardless if you use
I think
commit
the
to.
question was to me.
Well, I'm just making a comment. If the board says commit, the board can always change that. I don't think it locks us in. to 5 years, because if something happens in year 3 and we need to make that change,
Mhm.
we would be at liberty to make that change.
I think, you know, we do an annual budget review, we do a half-year review, that if we do recommend to commit and then we see that something is a shortfall in Park and Recs, it makes number 2, should I not be on the board, should you not be on the board, does somebody else not on the board, be on the board, realize that there was some ability to be flexible. We're all here, we may not be here in 3 years, and so, or 1 year or something like that, so.
But
That's
I
all.
mean, again, you do realize that all the money is basically this year and next year. The risk is not gonna be that much more.
Right, and I do, and again, it's the board majority, I'm not gonna, this is not something I'm
We
gonna
could
start
add this
saying.
language subject to review.
Yeah, so, you
Yeah,
know, or
yeah.
subject to review, there we go.
Okay,
So-
To keep that flexibility.
okay, I'm open to that.
So I wanna just comment on just what the next steps are, yes, what is,
Yes.
what's on tonight. So this was a discussion item, there's no action that's necessary. But my thought was if there was consensus for each of these, there'd be a different way each would be dealt with. So like item 1, if there's consensus, we would bring back an item in 2 weeks that would recommend moving the revenue for the current fiscal year, and then from that point forward, it would be budgeted in the fire fund until such time as that changes. If you'd like a stronger policy statement incorporated in the strategic financial policies, that's also something we could do, but it's not necessary to do. Item number 2, my thoughts were we already have a strategic financial policy dealing with the $80,000 commitment. Depending on what the board as a whole wants to do with that, we can add to that strategic financial policy. That would be something we formally consider, can kind of get down to the nitty-gritty on the specific language. Yeah, it could read something like subject to review and approval or recommendation by the Admin and Finance Committee and the board's approval of the budget. All the CFD funds beginning, such and such date through 29/30, are expected to be committed. I have to work on some specific language, but to the fire fund. So that could be a revision to the strategic financial policies. And then item 4, we don't have a policy that deals with these grants. The grants really came about when at a time when the district recognizes additional, sort of excess solid waste revenue. And a board member at the time wanted to see some of that money go back to the community in terms of items that would promote or enhance recycling. And, staff has sort of struggled with that program. I think the people who benefit from the grant appreciate it. I don't think it's generating any extra recycling. I mean, the things that we're paying for are prohibited, like converting styrofoam cups to compostable containers or something. Styrofoam technically is unlawful already, although it's very attainable. It's not permissible in this county. So you could eliminate that program. You're not really eliminating the program. The way I would go about implementing this, if there's consensus on this, would be not to fund it at the beginning of the fiscal year through the budget, but rather after you've like maybe after mid-year, you saw, okay, we still have excess money in Parks and Rec. Let's release $10,000 in grant funds. Because of, like, for example, this fiscal year for Parks and Recreation, we had a surplus. And so by definition, the way this reads, we could have funded it. But now, as we're 7-8 months through the year, we aren't realizing that surplus. We've approved amendments to the budget for things like tree removal and whatnot that were not anticipated initially or not included in the budget initially and have consumed or used up that surplus. And then we've had some revenues that we were hoping for that didn't materialize. And we have had other revenues that have beat the budget and all that. But in this case, my expectation would be that you wouldn't fund it until there's money, and then there'd be like a release of funds at the end of the fiscal year.
Sounds good to me.
I have one stupid question here. When we have that, I lost it. The fund that we're dumping money into, where does that show up?
It's not gonna.
Are you speaking of the future fire operation set aside?
Yes, thank
Shows up on your summary of fund balance page of the budget.
It's not gonna be. It's not gonna be on the model or so,
So
it
it's-
could be, so we may end up seeing the fire budget, like when we do it, could be negative.
Mhm.
But we've set aside enough
The
money that we
to
could
get
just,
cover
it's like saying.
So, but it would have a light item. that we
Yeah,
would say,
that's where
okay.
that forecast of the June 30th balance of $194,000, it comes out of your summary of fund balance page for the current year. And then I added, you approved a budget amendment in November when we kind of straightened out all the out of county assignment money. You remember,
Yeah.
we had revenue coming in and we had overtime costs and we had asset replacement costs. Well, we put I can't remember the exact amount. I think it was like $25,000. That was above and beyond those into the future fire operations. So that's where it's accounted for, summary of fund balance page in the budget.
Okay.
Okay, so is there consensus to move forward? Then I think there's enough direction for you to.
Yeah, as I said, one of these items you'll see very likely
Okay.
see in 2 weeks, and the others will
Okay.
over the next couple months.
Okay, all right then, so
Yeah,
there's
there's,
consensus. Well, that would work, thank you very much. I just wanna, since we have a staff here too, I just wanna show, say that this shows from the board the commitment that we have to, I think, both fire and park. We've done it for park before and obviously doing it for fire. When most of us, when we first came on on board, they were talking about closing the fire department and moving to CAL FIRE, so that was not acceptable to none of us. And not only we kept our fire department, we managed to, through Measure A, to make it 24/7 operation, thanks to our staff and to hard work to pass Measure A. I think we were all involved in that, Melissa, everyone was involved, so. And now, hopefully we'll get a fire truck, to make the operations better, get better equipment for fire department, so. We appreciate what you've done. Please let the staff know how much we appreciate that, and you guys have our support. And we always will be supportive of our parks as well, as Director Giardini mentioned. Please, bring it to a general manager. If there's any concern, we could budget it. We could agendize the items and discuss it, or through the committee. I think that probably would be the best way to go. So we want to hear from all of you guys. We want to keep this. It's a teamwork. And, there's some years that park's doing better than than fire or vice versa, but we all, we will be supportive. We really want everything to work cohesively. Also want to thank, with the ad hoc committee, I want to thank Director Pearson for participating. I know it was busy time for you, but for participating and, asking really good questions, and it was nice to hear that. I think it was very collaborative, but after the meeting, I'm all, wow, this was nice, this is the way it should be, so I appreciate that. Natalie isn't here, but she did the behind the scenes number, she calculated those numbers and she had those ready for us to go. She did some investigation, so that was nice. And I wanna thank our general manager. Boy, you started, you were prepared. You had these reports ready for us to go. And you answered a lot of questions, and believe me, there were a lot of questions, and you answered them all. And then the ones you did, there was one you didn't know, you went and you did the research and came back, and you were open to all our ideas, and we discussed it. It was I think it was a great meeting that we had, and I think our board and Templeton is, we're thankful to have you, and we're blessed to have you as our general manager. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. Appreciate you're great. So I don't know what else I could say. So that being said, I think there's consensus, and we could move to our next item, right?
Sure.
All right. Okay, so general manager's report.
So what, I think on Saturday morning, I sent out kind of a lengthy email, just some recent things that have been going on. It's been a busy time with homeless activities and storm prep and all kinds of stuff. In Templeton, we were very fortunate to have really no major storm impacts. The rain forecast, the rain rates were lower than was originally forecasted. That was something we were very concerned about, but it was very windy. We did have some wind related issues, but no real destruction. And no real power problems. That was very helpful, as well. So on the utility side and really even on the fire, response side, not a lot of storm related issues, coming out of the weekend. So that was great. I do want to let you know though, that it's just I don't want to alarm you, but, we're watching groundwater levels at Selby site closely. Groundwater levels are rising. The groundwater is coming closer to the surface. That has two impacts on us. One, the closer it is to the surface, the less water we can get into the ground. It just doesn't percolate as well. You can picture this at home. When it's really wet, it forms puddles. The puddles don't go away very fast. When it's dry, it goes away quickly. And then two, we have a hard stop when the groundwater reaches a certain level, 8 feet below the surface. We cannot, even if we could percolate it, we cannot dispose of any more water. We're not there yet, but the Santa Margarita Lakes began spilling yesterday morning. Earlier today it was at about 105%. So it rose through yesterday and today. River's running pretty rapidly, nothing like last January, but if you haven't seen it in a while, it's worth taking a look. So we anticipate that groundwater is going to stay pretty high. And that will affect our percolation rates. And so that's just something to keep an eye on. And then finally, just to let you know, I'll be gone on vacation next week. I will be working a bit. We've got some items that we're pushing forward for the next board meeting, and I'll make sure those make it on the agenda and that agenda goes out. But I'll be out of the office next week, and I'll send you some more details as we get closer to the weekend.
Question. When we can't percolate, don't we have the spray fields or is that something?
We do. We have well, first we have wet weather storage, a lot of it actually, about 60 days worth of wet weather storage at the wastewater treatment plant, large places to put the water. And then last year we were able to put it in storage and then bring the water out of storage and back out to Selby. And that's our anticipation this year when we can't discharge all the water to put it in storage and then retrieve it. We also have spray fields as another means of getting rid of the water. So if we anticipate the storage not being sufficient, then we'll begin using the spray fields. The downside of the spray fields is we don't get credit for that water as a future water supply. It's just gone, lost. So that's why we work so hard to try to percolate all of it.
Okay. Other question is, any progress on the GCSD engineer fulfillment of that position?
Not enough. But as soon as I have a start date or something other newsworthy to share, I will. We don't have a background completed on our candidate.
Oh, so we're okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No? Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, public comment? Or any questions from manager? No? Perfect. Thank you. Committee reports. We have a tag report. Any questions on that? Everything's good, man. Thanks for attending. That's always fun to attend. Activity update reports, parks, recreation and solid waste. Any questions on that? Melissa's been busy as usual. Yeah,
I have
so basketball, go ahead.
I would just like to congratulate Melissa on being elected the Region 3 representative for the State Board of California Park and Recreation Society.
Thank you.
Paid off, but congratulations. Good job. So how much of that time are you gonna take for this?
Like maybe like an hour a year.
That all?
It's a lot of things that I was already doing, honestly. So, yeah, I just have a bigger swatch of California now that I get to represent. But a lot of it is already, it happens at the conferences that I go to. And there's, I think, 2 or 3 other meetings, one in May in Yosemite. And,
They couldn't have found a better person.
yeah, I'm excited.
Congratulations.
All the way to Nevada. Let's go.
I did have one thing to add though, the beer run.
Yeah.
The date has been secured, June 1st, registration's open and you'll start seeing advertisements for it.
And now that I'm on the Park and Rec committee, do I have to do the beer run?
Yes.
Can I do a
It's
wine run?
mandatory.
You don't have to run.
You have to, you have to run, but you can't have any beer.
You get the beer at 10
But I'll give you a bright orange vest and a sign so you can like just cheer other runners on.
I am working
Great.
with Grizzly Youth Academy to get the cadets out
It's genius.
to do the race.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's.
Yeah, each platoon has 50 students, and so we're trying to commit one platoon.
That's awesome.
So
Oh, that'd be awesome.
they do that kind of thing. We just have to keep them away from the beer, but.
Yeah.
If they don't have a bracelet, they ain't getting it, so.
Right, director's report and or comments, any activities or any reports you guys attended on behalf of PCSD? No? Good. We have the future items and I guess that's it, right? Adjourn, all right.
Are we gonna hear from Commander Manueli?
Oh, he doesn't have, no, he doesn't have a report.
Oh, you're at work?
We just wanted to hang out.
Yeah.
You just enjoy it so much.
He put an eye on us.
He heard you might get violent.
All right, meeting adjourned, thank you guys.
Well, thank you for attending.